So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, Dan. We are very fortunate to be with Daniel Runde, who is Senior Vice President at the CSIS in Washington, D.C., and he's very kindly agreed to come to Madrid and to the Elcano Institute in particular to talk to us about this report that the CSIS has recently produced, Enabling an Economic Transformation of Ukraine. And we basically wanted to ask you, Dan, to tell us a little about the report, about the work that CSIS has been doing on Ukraine, and perhaps also why you wanted to come to Spain in particular.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Charles. I love Spain. I lived in Spain 30 years ago. It changed my life. My Spanish is pretty good. It's not amazing, but me defiendo, and so it's pretty good. And so I really think Spain is a really special place. I also thought that we're very appreciative at CSIS for a partnership with the Royal Institute Elcano, where we've had a number of very fine scholars from your instituto at CSIS over the last 4 or 5 years. It's been very valuable to us. We've been doing this work on Ukraine for the last year, looking at how we're going to think about Reconstruction on one hand, and how we're going to see the role of the private sector in Reconstruction. Because there's not enough foreign aid to rebuild Ukraine. The numbers are enormous. It's certainly in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I won't take a guess as to how much we're talking about, but it's obviously it changes day by day as long as the war goes on. It's a terrible, terrible thing. The illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia is just one of the greatest breaches of international norms really ever. And so one of the things, we've done about 200 interviews. We've convened 20 seminars on different topics related to Reconstruction. We've produced 12 background papers. We've convened a very high-level global commission, including very high-level Europeans. We're really grateful that the former foreign minister of Spain, my friend Ana Palacio, agreed to be a commissioner. Frankly, she was my first phone call when I was putting this together. My first phone call was to former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, Ana Palacio, and said, "Ana, I need your help." And she's been just a tremendous member of the commission. The commission has all agreed to stay on. We've been together for about 9 months, and they've all re-upped for another year. I think this is probably going to go on longer than that. But we've convened this commission 3 times, and we've produced this first report of the commission, Enabling an Economic Transformation of Ukraine. So I often use the shorthand Reconstruction. The Ukrainians like to think about modernization, transformation, and so they want to think about it in a different way. Based on all of this work, the message I want to transmit to your listeners is that we should align all Reconstruction, all reform work with Ukraine joining the European Union. That's going to take a long time, and that's a long, boring, glacial, arduous process. But the process of joining the European Union is a really important vector, a really important way in which we can get the kind of reforms that Ukraine's going to need to make in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, in the political economic sphere. There's not enough foreign aid to kind of change their calculus, the voters' calculus. There's not enough foreign aid to change some of the interest groups in Ukraine's calculus. But membership in the European Union is the most attractive, most powerful carrot in the world, and we underestimate that. I came to Madrid because Spain has the presidency of the European Union in the second half of 2023. We're now close to March of 2023. I'm coming before Spain has its presidency to make a plea to stakeholders here in Spain to use its presidency to carry out the process of beginning negotiations, begin the real process of adhesion or accession to the European Union. That's going to take forever. It'll take 10 years probably. My other hope is that Spain will make a commitment to walk with Ukraine over the next 10 years, whether it's a socialist government or a Partido Popular government. It doesn't matter. There should be a política del Estado. There should be a state policy of whatever color government Spain has over the next 10 years. And the reason I say that is because I think Spain has a historical responsibility. Spain joined the European Union in 1986. There were countries like France and the United Kingdom that were reluctant to have Spain join the European Union. Germany committed to walk with Spain for 10 years, was its sponsor, was its friend, was its partner. I would love to see Spain return that historic favor and say, we're going to make a multi-year, a decade-long commitment, regardless of what government. I hope President Sanchez will have the leader of the opposition standing next to him, and I hope he makes a statement like that. It would be a really powerful thing. So I'm here because I believe Spain has an important role in its presidency of the European Union. Spain's been very generous. Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ana Palacio, reminds me, and she's right, Dan, you need to think beyond foreign aid donations and weapons donations, of which Spain has been generous. But also you need to understand that burden sharing from allies like Spain include things like how many refugees we're taking in. And I think you're the fourth largest host of refugees in the European Union. It's very generous, and that's a significant responsibility that Spain is taking on. And that also, that when you think about the price of electricity or the price of gas in Spain, that we, the Spanish people, are carrying on that burden of additional price increases because of the war in Ukraine. You in the United States, less so. And she's right. And so I hear that and I understand that. I do think, though, given all that, and given sort of this historic moment, Spain has this unique opportunity, and President Sanchez in particular has an opportunity to say, we're going to make this an important part of Spanish policy going forward. And this could be, frankly, one of President Sanchez's foreign policy legacies, is to begin the process of European Union accession for Ukraine. I also think that over time, as Ukraine reforms, and Ukraine, when we get to peace, and where Ukraine has some level of security, Ukraine as a potential member and ultimately a member of the European Union is an enormous business opportunity for Spanish companies. So I'm hoping that Spanish companies become educated on the opportunity. There are only maybe several dozen Spanish companies that are currently operating in Ukraine. What I'd like to see is, and I'm guessing in Poland, there's probably several hundred Spanish companies operating in Poland. What I'd like to see is, over time, several hundred Spanish companies operating in Ukraine. Ukraine has enormous agricultural potential. It has enormous potential for its creative economy, has enormous manufacturing potential, has enormous potential in renewable energy, and it also has great potential even in tourism. And I know that Spain, something like more than 10% of the economy of Spain is in tourism. So Spain has something that it can share with Ukraine in that realm as well.
That's a very attractive and ambitious vision. The report talks about some of the difficulties, right, that Ukraine will inevitably face, and that companies, foreign companies, face when they begin to think about doing business in Ukraine. What are the big differences? What are the biggest obstacles, do you think, standing in the way of Ukraine's transformation?
So I think one of the issues is Ukraine, unfortunately, suffers from perhaps a not totally fair country brand of being a terribly corrupt place. There is corruption in Ukraine. There's also corruption in places like Mexico and Colombia. And I believe that a number of Spanish companies operate in places like Mexico and Colombia, and they're able to do business in a clean way in Mexico and Colombia. You can do business in Ukraine in a clean way, and you can adhere to global standards or international standards and practices on anti-corruption. But unfortunately, I think one of the successes of Russian disinformation is that part of the country brand, unfortunately, Ukraine has been unfairly branded as a terribly corrupt place. Some of it's deserved, some of it's not deserved. So I think one of the problems is just getting over that perception. There are rule of law challenges. There are issues of governance. 5 of the 7 categories of reforms that are being asked of the Ukrainians to join the European Union have to do with governance. So this is why I say earlier that we need to align all of our fixes with EU accession, because that's sort of the process by which you can make a laundry list of the things you want to see fixed. They also need to do some land reform. You can't actually buy agricultural land today. It's one of 6 countries in the world, along with North Korea and maybe Venezuela, where you can't buy agricultural land. That's crazy. So that has to change. They've got 3,000 state-owned enterprises. That's too many. Some of them have to close down and some will be privatized. And some will function as multi-stakeholder partnerships or kind of have a, or some sort of a public-private entity. But there's going to be, but I think overall, once Ukraine wins the war, there's going to be an enormous opportunity for Spanish business to invest in Ukraine. I think now is the time, before the war ends, for Spanish companies to get familiar with Ukraine, to know it better. So perhaps one of the opportunities during the Spain's EU presidency is perhaps to have a business conference for Spanish companies and other EU members to think about opportunities to invest in Ukraine. The Ukrainians would really welcome that. We need to think about the war in Ukraine as a violent, angry divorce after 300 years. Ukraine is having a violent, angry divorce after 300 years from Russia. It's changing everything. It's changing what language it speaks. It changes what Orthodox church it goes to. Some people are changing what day they celebrate Christmas. They're changing where they get their electricity from. They want to change their trading partners. They want to change where they get their energy from. They're changing almost literally everything, and their standards and where their infrastructure goes and what kind of infrastructure that they have. So Spain, which is strong in infrastructure, strong in energy, strong in agribusiness, strong in pharmaceuticals, and strong in tourism, and strong in telecom, has a lot to offer Ukraine, so in the private sector. And so I think now's the time for Spanish business to get familiar with it, because there should come a time where there should be a list of those countries that were with Ukraine and those countries that were not with Ukraine. So those countries that voted the wrong way in the UN and their companies should be punished for that. They should be remembered. And that moment when Reconstruction happens, those countries like China and unfortunately some other countries that I won't name that ought to know better have voted the wrong way. China is an ally of the Russians. They are financing the Russian war machine. They are betraying the Ukrainians at every step of the way in the United Nations process. They're betraying the Ukrainians every step of the way in the G20. That is not a friend of Ukraine. So Chinese businesses should not be participating in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Ukraine ought to be getting an economic divorce from China, frankly. They are not Ukraine's friend.
So thank you very much, Dan, for being here and for giving us your time. We really wish you all the best with this project, and you can count on us if we possibly can be of any assistance.
Charles, I'm really grateful. I'm thrilled to be in Madrid. It's a privilege to be at the Royal Institute Elcano. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you.
Thanks.